Whenever it comes to discussing the life of being a digital nomad, the two top destinations that always come up are Bali and Thailand. Now, I have just spent 30 days living in Bali, and I've also spent 30 days now living in Thailand and another 30 days last year. And so in this video, I want to give you my full comparison of these two places from the perspective of a digital nomad, expat, and an online business owner. Specifically from the perspective of looking at these places as a potential place to live, either long-term or short-term, rather than as a place to travel, because the considerations for those two things are going to be very, very different. So which one do I like better? Which one do I think of these two places offers a better environment to live as a digital nomad? Let's find out in this video. Now, the big caveat is that obviously Bali is an island in the country of Indonesia, whereas Thailand is a full country. So of course this comparison is kind of not fair because we're comparing all of Thailand to just one island in Indonesia. So in Thailand, you could get all kinds of different vibes, from a bustling city in Bangkok to a more relaxed island vibe in a place like Koh Samui or Phuket. Whereas in Bali, you pretty much just have the one vibe, the island vibe of Bali, even though obviously Bali has a lot of different areas that offer slightly different things. But I believe I can talk about this because I have spent time in most of the major locations in Thailand. Right now I'm in Bangkok, and I also spent time in Bangkok before. I've been to Phuket, Koh Samui for a full month, Pattaya. The only major destination in Thailand I have not been to is Chiang Mai. In Bali, I spent most of my time in Canggu, which is the most popular area for expats, but I also spent some time in Uluwatu and Ubud, so I think I have a pretty good idea of the different places that both of these locations offer. But I suppose the first thing to consider is variety, and so Thailand, being much bigger, certainly has a lot more to offer. So Thailand will win for variety, because if you just get access to the country of Thailand, you can then pick and choose and perhaps spend some time in Bangkok, some time in Phuket, all these different kinds of locations if you don't just like one vibe. Now, speaking of living in one of these places, what we need to talk about is the topic of visas and taxes. So what kind of visa options do you actually have to move to one of these places? Because if you can't get a visa, then it's sort of redundant to even consider it, right? Now, luckily, both of these places are going to have options for you. For both Bali and Thailand, obviously, you always have the option of just going in there and getting a tourist visa. And then once that tourist visa expires, after either 30 or 60 days, then you can do what's called a visa run, which means that you basically just exit the country and go back in. A lot of people do this. This has historically been something that, while it is technically on the gray area, both these countries tend to accept. Like, they just sort of turn a blind eye to you. But for me personally, long term, this is not something I'd want to do. Now let's talk about Indonesia. So you have a couple of options. So let's say you're trying to make Bali your secondary base, or like a base for half the year or something like that. Then for that purpose, they have the perfect visa for you. It's called the B211A visa. It's essentially a visa that you get for 60 days, and then you can extend it twice for another 60 days. So you can live and also legally work remotely in Indonesia using this visa for up to 180 days in a year. It costs $600. It's a single entry visa. So if you go to the country with this visa and then you leave, then you're going to have to get another one when you go back. It's unclear to me whether you can just get two of these in the entire year. I'm pretty sure you can, but you want to check that with professionals before moving forward. Then for a longer term, like more proper long-term visa, you have what's called the kitas. So they have several different options. Let's say you have a job offer in Indonesia, you could get the work kitas and things like this. But for most of you, if you're an entrepreneur, what you'd be looking at is the investor kitas. Now this one is a lot more difficult to qualify for because it requires a full $600,000 investment in a company in Indonesia for you to qualify for this. There's going to be a lot of shady agencies that are going to try to sell you this visa and sort of try to fake these documents to make it seem as if you have this investment. But I wouldn't recommend doing that. I would recommend doing things properly. So if you do have that kind of business where you have that big of investment, then this is a great option. But otherwise, you want to look at different options. You also have the 5-year second home visa that requires a $130,000 deposit in an Indonesian bank account, and basically you need to maintain that deposit for the entire duration of that visa. As for Thailand, the most popular visa that they have, that's the most unique visa in the world, is the Thai Elite visa. It's basically a visa for duration between 5 and 20 years, depending on which package you get. It's a multiple entry visa that gives you a ton of all of these kinds of luxury benefits. Like, it gives you expedited immigration. It gives you all these benefits with these like points that you get using this visa and things like this. Now, this is fantastic if you want to live in Thailand long term and you want it to be your main base. But the big con here is that it is a very expensive visa. I think even the cheapest option costs $25,000 US. Now, you can get that for 5 years, so that means basically $5,000 a year is your cost of having this visa and living in Thailand. Whether that's worth it for you or not depends on you, your financial situation, etc. But other than that, they also have the LTR, the long-term resident visa, that they have several categories for this. Now, if you work in a specific industry, you have enough income, things like this, it can be quite difficult to qualify for though. But if you can qualify for it, then that is a great option. But what is very interesting about Thailand is that just before recording this video, like a week before recording this video, they have announced the new what's called Destination Thailand visa that is essentially branded as a digital nomad visa, targeted specifically at digital nomads to allow them to be in the country for up to 180 days. Now, all the details haven't been announced yet. It's unclear when this will actually go live, but once this goes live, then basically Thailand is going to have almost an exact equivalent to the Indonesian's B211A visa that will allow you to be in the country for 6 months, which would be great for someone like me who would just be looking to stay under that amount of days anyway. Now, before this new visa, I would have said that Indonesia wins in the visa department simply because they have options both for long-term and short-term. But now with this new one, I would say that Thailand takes the win because they have an excellent option for long-term staying in the country and an excellent option for short-term staying in the country if this visa does end up once and if this visa actually ends up going through and going live. In terms of taxes, the tax rates in both of these countries are quite similar. And for both of these countries, if you stay in the country for less than 183 days, then you will not become a tax resident. So if you stay for less than 6 months, then you basically don't have to worry about taxes because you're not going to be taxable. If you do become a full tax resident, however, Thailand will take the slight edge because they have these rules where essentially you're only going to be taxed on the money that you bring into the country, which means basically if you spend money in Thailand or you bring money into a Thai bank account, only that money will count as being taxable in Thailand, which means feasibly, even if you make $1 million a year, but you only spend $50,000 a year, you would only be taxed on that $50,000. Whereas in Indonesia, they have similar worldwide taxation as most of the countries in the world. So I would say overall for visas and taxes, Thailand will take the slight edge. Now, in terms of location, both of these places are in Southeast Asia, and surprisingly, I would say Thailand offers slightly better access for the rest of Southeast Asia. You're very close to Malaysia, to Singapore, the Philippines, Vietnam, whereas Bali is slightly out of the way, but the airport is going to be smaller. It's going to have less connections than the Bangkok airport. So that is something to consider. So for location as well, Thailand takes just a slight edge. Now, in terms of weather, both of these are going to be extremely similar in the sense that they're going to be very hot and humid for the entire year, and both of them are going to have a dry season and a rainy season. Now, the difference seems to be that in Bali, the weather is very constant in terms of temperatures for the entire year, around between 29 and like 32 degrees high during the day. Whereas in Thailand, in the hottest periods in the year, it can get very hot. Like around a month ago, I saw that in Bangkok, it was closing, like 40 degrees or something crazy like that. They're very similar, except Thailand is more extreme when it comes to both temperatures and the rain and things like this. Now, when it comes to weather, this will probably mostly come down to which months of the year do you actually want to spend in the place. Because the rainy seasons in these countries are at different times of the year. For example, if you're someone like me who wants to spend the summer months in one of these places, then Bali would take the edge simply because Bali has dry season during the summer months. Whereas if you wanted to spend the winter months in one of these places, then probably Thailand, it kind of depends on which place in Thailand you're in. But for example, Bangkok is going to have their dry season during the winter months. But if you want to spend the entire year, then I would say here, Bali will take the slight edge. Now, in terms of the overall vibe of these two places, I would say this one will heavily depend, obviously, on which place in Thailand are you going to be. Bangkok is going to offer a very exciting sort of bustling city vibe, where there's a lot happening. So if you're a city person, then that is really going to be for you. Whereas if you're more into the island vibe, then in Thailand, you will probably look more into something like Phuket or Koh Samui. And in terms of Phuket and Koh Samui versus Bali, vibe-wise, they're extremely similar. I think the difference here mainly is that Bali is going to be more westernized, like more foreign, whereas Thailand is going to have that foreign westernized influence, but it's also going to be still more local, more Thai. Also, overall, Thailand is a bit more crazy, like it has a bit more of that crazy nightlife, and like if you're into all of the sex tourism and all of that, then obviously Thailand is going to have a lot of that, whereas Bali is a lot more modest in that sense, a lot less of that. The islands in Thailand, I would say, have more picturesque scenery. I remember in Koh Samui, we would just ride a scooter around the entire island. It was absolutely amazing. amazing. Whereas in Bali, it's a bit more flat. And I would say also the traffic just makes it much more difficult to just go around freely with a scooter, although you can obviously do that if you go outside of Canggu and outside of the busier areas. So for this one, I really can't give the point to either one of these places because it's really going to depend on what do you prefer. For food, I think it's pretty simple. Both of these have excellent Western and international food. And then on top of that, Thailand is going to have a great Thai food, whereas Bali is going to have a great Indonesian food. I would say personally, and for most people, Thai food is going to be better than Indonesian food. Like Thai food is like, it's world renowned as like one of the most popular cuisines in the world, whereas Indonesian food isn't really that popular. And I think for a reason is a bit more modest. Like it's really good as well. It can be, but it just doesn't have the same variety. And for me, I just prefer Thai food. So for that reason alone, I'm going to give the edge on food as well to Thailand, simply because I prefer Thai food over Indonesian food. Now let's look at cost of living. So again, it's going to depend on where you are in Thailand. But if you just compare, for example, Bali versus Bangkok, I've got this data here from the site called Nomad that I usually use to just get a rough idea of the differences in cost of living in different places. But you can see here that the cost of living in Bangkok is 21% higher than in Bali, and cost of living including rent in Bangkok is 1.4% higher than in Bali. So Bangkok is going to be slightly more expensive than Bali. But then if we compare Bali and Phuket, then we can see that Bali is going to be 12.7% lower if we don't account for rent, and 3% lower if we account for rent. So if you compare Bali and Phuket, then Bali is going to be slightly cheaper. So overall, it would seem like Bali is going to be slightly cheaper than Thailand. Now, in terms of safety, so both of these places are going to be extremely safe if you compare them to any city in the West, basically. If you compare to London, New York, Paris, both these places are going to be extremely safe compared to all of those places. But then again, obviously they're not going to be at the same level as a Dubai or a Singapore that are some of the safest places in the world. But if you just look at a comparison here of crime levels in both these places from the same site, Numbeo, we can see that the crime index is going to be slightly higher in Bali compared to Phuket. And similarly, when we compare Bali to Bangkok. So Bali is going to be slightly less safe than Thailand, but from my experience and from speaking to locals in both of these places, everyone says that they feel completely safe in both of these locations. So I don't think this is something to worry about too much. Now, something that's going to be very important from a digital nomad perspective is work infrastructure. Where is it easier and better to actually get work done? Now, I would say this depends more on, again, what kind of place you're in rather than one of these two countries. I would say if you're in Bangkok, like in a city environment, I find that this is more conducive to work because you have all the city amenities. Like you're in a city where that's bustling and it feels like there's people around you that are doing work and things like this. Whereas if you're in an environment like Bali or Phuket or Koh Samui, that's more of an island, like a holiday destination, then that's not nearly as conducive to getting work done, at least for me personally. Although obviously if you work from home, like you can get work done anyway, there shouldn't really be an issue or an excuse to not get work done, but just a minor thing there to consider. But in terms of just actual infrastructure, the only place where these are different is I think in the internet speeds. I think Thailand wins by far in the internet speed. Everywhere you go in Thailand, the internet is going to be amazing. Whereas in Bali, I found that it was a bit choppy and the speeds weren't quite as fast as I would have liked. But I mean, it's not really a big deal. It's not terrible or anything. You can still use it, but it's just a small thing to consider. In terms of co-working spaces and things like this, both of these places in any of these locations that you go to are going to have a lot of great options. So I would give just a slight edge to Thailand. So technically, Thailand will win this comparison, like it got more points, but really, like, all of these differences are very minor. I think what it will come down to is just a couple of questions. Number one, like I said earlier, which months of the year would you spend there? Would you spend the entire year or would you only spend half the year? Then the second question is which food and / culture do you prefer? And that's going to be an entirely subjective question. And also importantly, in which place do you know people? So if you happen to know friends that already live in Bangkok or already live in Phuket, that might just be the reason to at least check out that place first. And perhaps most importantly, in which one of these places can you get a visa that suits your preferences? And last thing to consider is that let's say you can't decide, let's say you just like both of these places, you could also just get the 6-month visa in Bali and then get the 6-month visa in Thailand once that rolls out and spend the other 6 months in Thailand, or just use tourist visas or whatever in the meantime. So if you don't want to choose, then you don't even have to choose. And that is the great thing about living this lifestyle. If you want to hear my full thoughts after spending 30 days in Bali, you can watch this video right here. And if you want to hear my full thoughts after spending my first 30 days as a digital nomad in Thailand, you can watch this video right here. So watch one of these videos or both of them next. I'll see you in the next one.